The office was almost empty when the moment happened, the kind of quiet that made every sound feel louder and every thought feel heavier, and Ethan Miller stood near the wide glass window on the 21st floor, looking down at the streets of Boston as daylight faded into cold blue evening, his jacket still on, his laptop closed but his mind restless, because he had stayed late again, not out of duty but out of habit, the habit of avoiding the silence waiting for him at home, and he did not hear the door open behind him at first, did not notice the soft click or the slow steps on the carpet, and that was why the feeling came before the sight, that strange awareness that someone was there, watching him, and when he turned, he saw her, Claire Whitman, standing just inside the doorway, holding a leather briefcase close to her side, her coat dusted with snow, her dark hair slightly undone by the wind, and for one brief second time seemed to pause because this was not a planned meeting or a polite gathering, this was an accident, and accidents often reveal more than intention ever could. Claire had only come to drop off her husband's briefcase, forgotten again in the rush of the morning, and she expected an empty office, maybe a quick hello to the receptionist, but instead she found Ethan alone by the window, his tie loosened, his expression distant, and when their eyes met, her face changed so suddenly that Ethan felt it like a sharp breath in his chest, because it was not surprise alone, not confusion or discomfort, but something deeper and harder to explain, as if she had walked in on a truth neither of them had spoken aloud, her eyes widening slightly before softening, her lips parting as if she might say something but choosing not to, and in that second Ethan saw a flicker of emotion pass through her, recognition, sadness, and something that looked painfully close to relief, and he straightened instinctively, aware of how he must look, aware of who she was. Aware of who her husband was, the man whose name was on every office door and email signature, the man who had given Ethan his chance, and yet none of that mattered in that instant because what mattered was the quiet understanding in her gaze, the sense that she had seen him not as an employee or a polite acquaintance but as a person carrying weight, and the silence stretched between them, thick and uncomfortable, until Claire finally took a small step forward, as if grounding herself back in reality, and offered a polite smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, saying she hadn't expected anyone to still be working, her voice calm but softer than before, and Ethan answered quickly, too quickly, saying he was just finishing up, though there was nothing left to finish, and they stood there exchanging simple words that carried far more meaning than they should have, her eyes briefly drifting past him to the darkening city, then returning to his face with a look that felt almost apologetic. And Ethan wondered what she saw when she looked at him, whether she saw a tired young man chasing stability, or a reminder of choices she once made, or something that unsettled her because it felt too familiar, and he noticed how her fingers tightened around the briefcase strap, how she hesitated as if deciding whether to speak or leave, and when she finally said he looked tired, it wasn't casual, it was observant, kind, and it struck him harder than he expected, because no one had said that to him in a long time, and without thinking he replied that she did too, and the air shifted, her smile fading just slightly as if the truth of it surprised her, and in that moment Ethan understood that whatever had passed between them was not attraction in the simple sense, not something reckless or loud, but something quiet and dangerous, a shared recognition of loneliness, and Claire seemed to realize it too, because she stepped back almost immediately, drawing a line neither had crossed but both had seen, and she nodded, wished him a good evening, and turned to leave, her heels soft against the carpet, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before, and Ethan watched her go, his heart beating faster for reasons he couldn't fully name, realizing that something small yet powerful had just occurred, something that would not fade easily, because it wasn't the meeting itself that mattered, it was the look on her face when she saw him, the look that told him she had seen more than she should have. And as the door closed behind her and the office returned to stillness, Ethan stood alone by the window again, knowing with a quiet certainty that the evening had changed something in both of them, even if neither would ever say it out loud. Claire told herself the moment in the office meant nothing, yet as she walked through the cold Boston air toward her car, the image of Ethan standing by the window stayed with her, his tired eyes, his honest reply, and the quiet space that had formed between them. And she drove home replaying it in her mind, wondering why such a brief exchange had unsettled her so deeply, because she had lived a full life, built a stable marriage, learned how to smile at dinners and charity events, learned how to be composed and supportive, and yet something about that evening felt like a mirror held up without warning, The next day she returned to the office again, this time for a scheduled meeting, and she told herself to act normal, to keep everything light and distant, but the moment she stepped into the building she felt more aware of her surroundings, of voices, footsteps, and when she saw Ethan across the hallway she noticed how he slowed slightly, how his posture changed as if he too was measuring the moment, and they greeted each other politely, exchanging brief words about work and weather, nothing personal, nothing risky, yet every sentence felt carefully chosen, and Claire sensed an unspoken agreement between them to stay on safe ground, though the air still carried a quiet tension. Days passed. Then weeks, and their paths crossed often but never alone for long, in meetings, in passing conversations near the coffee machine, in polite nods across conference tables, and each time Claire noticed small things, like how Ethan listened more than he spoke, how he waited for others to finish before answering, how his smile appeared only when something truly mattered to him, and she found herself thinking about him when she shouldn't, during long afternoons at home when the house felt too large and too quiet, or during dinners where conversation stayed on the surface and emotion stayed hidden, and she realized that what drew her toward Ethan was not excitement but understanding, a sense that he saw life the way she did, with care and patience and unspoken questions. Ethan, on his side, tried to stay busy, filling his evenings with work, exercise, anything to quiet his thoughts, but Claire's presence lingered in small ways, in the sound of her voice, in the way she had looked at him, as if she recognized something familiar, and he felt torn between respect and curiosity, knowing who she was, knowing what lines existed, yet feeling something gentle grow despite his efforts, not desire but connection, the kind that forms when two people feel seen without asking to be. One evening, as rain tapped against the office windows and most employees had already left, Ethan stayed behind again to finish a report, and when he looked up from his screen he saw Claire standing nearby, waiting politely as if unsure whether to interrupt, and for a moment neither spoke, the quiet stretching between them, until she asked if he had a moment, her voice calm but careful, and he nodded, closing his laptop, and they spoke about simple things, about the workload, about the weather, about how the city felt different in the rain, and the conversation flowed easily, too easily, each word peeling back the distance they had tried to keep, and Claire found herself smiling in a way she hadn't in a long time, while Ethan felt the weight in his chest lighten just a little, and yet both were aware of time passing, of the risk of staying too long in that quiet comfort, and when footsteps echoed down the hallway they both stepped back instinctively, returning to polite distance, and Claire excused herself, thanking him for listening, leaving Ethan alone again with thoughts that felt heavier than before. That night Claire lay awake beside her husband, staring at the ceiling, feeling guilt and confusion twist together, because nothing had happened, and yet something inside her had shifted, a reminder of emotions she thought she had settled long ago, while Ethan sat in his apartment, lights dim, replaying every conversation, every glance, aware that whatever this was, it was growing quietly, shaped by shared moments and careful restraint, and over the following weeks their interactions became shorter but more meaningful, their words fewer but charged with awareness, until one evening, as winter softened and days grew longer, Ethan received a message asking him to stay late again. And when he looked down the hallway he saw Claire waiting, not by accident this time, but by choice, her expression calm yet certain, and he understood that the distance they had tried to keep was beginning to fade, replaced by something they could no longer pretend not to feel. The days that followed carried a quiet weight that neither Claire nor Ethan could escape, because once something is recognized it cannot be unseen, and they both felt it in small, steady ways, in how they avoided each other's eyes during meetings yet sensed each other's presence instantly, in how their conversations grew careful and brief, stripped of warmth but heavy with meaning, and Claire tried to return fully to her routine, to dinners planned weeks in advance, to polite laughter and familiar comfort, yet she felt a growing distance inside herself, not from her husband as a person but from the version of herself that had learned to stay quiet and agreeable, and at night she lay awake listening to the familiar sounds of her home, realizing how much of her life ran on habit rather than feeling, while across the city Ethan filled his evenings with motion, long walks, late workouts, extra projects, anything to keep his mind from drifting back to the moments when Claire looked at him as if he mattered beyond his role, and he felt guilt press against his chest because he respected his boss, because he knew the lines he should not cross, and yet the connection he felt was not reckless or selfish. It was calm and steady, built on listening and recognition, and that made it harder to dismiss. Time moved forward, spring approaching slowly, and the office shifted with it, brighter mornings, lighter moods, yet the tension between them grew sharper, because restraint requires effort, and effort leaves marks, and one evening, after a long day filled with deadlines and quiet stress, Claire found herself alone in her car in the parking garage, hands resting on the steering wheel, unable to turn the key, overwhelmed by the feeling that she was standing at the edge of something important without knowing what choice to make, and she realized she needed clarity more than comfort, honesty more than silence. The next morning she spoke less than usual, her smile polite but distant, and Ethan noticed immediately, sensing something unsettled, and though he told himself to stay away, when he saw her standing alone in the break room later that afternoon, staring at her untouched coffee, he stepped in quietly, asking if she was okay, his voice low and respectful, and she looked up at him with tired eyes and answered honestly, saying she wasn't sure, and that simple truth opened a door neither had planned to open, and they talked then, not about feelings directly but about life, about choices that shape people slowly, about the strange way time changes priorities, and their words carried meaning without crossing boundaries, yet both felt the weight of what remained unsaid, and when someone entered the room they stopped instantly, returning to neutral expressions, reminded again of the world watching. That night Claire decided to leave the office early, choosing distance, choosing control, while Ethan stayed behind, staring at his screen without seeing it, realizing that what hurt most was not desire but restraint, the knowledge that some connections arrive at the wrong time and demand maturity rather than action, and days passed with a careful balance maintained, neither too close nor fully apart, until one quiet evening near the end of the quarter, when the office emptied. Earlier than usual, Ethan stayed late to finish a final report, and as the sun dipped low and the building grew still, he heard footsteps he recognized before he turned, and Claire stood at the end of the hallway, no coat this time, no hesitation, her posture calm, her expression steady, and she walked toward him slowly, stopping a few steps away, and said she needed to talk, not urgently, not emotionally, but honestly, and Ethan listened as she spoke about feeling unseen, about realizing she had lost parts of herself over time without meaning to, about how their brief conversations had reminded her of who she was before life became structured and predictable, and she made it clear she was not asking for anything improper, not asking him to change his life or hers, only acknowledging the truth between them, and Ethan answered with the same care, admitting that he felt the connection too, that it confused him because it felt rooted in respect rather than impulse, and they stood there in the quiet office, not touching, not moving closer, yet fully aware of the line between them, and when the conversation ended it felt like both relief and loss, because clarity often comes with consequence, and Claire thanked him for listening, her voice steady though her eyes held emotion, and she turned to leave, choosing distance once more, while Ethan watched her walk away, understanding that doing the right thing sometimes means carrying the weight of what could have been, and as the lights dimmed and the office returned to silence, both knew that whatever connection they shared had reached its turning point, demanding choices rooted not in desire but in integrity, even if that choice meant quiet heartbreak. The weeks after that honest conversation moved forward with a strange calm, as if the truth had settled everything even though it changed nothing on the surface, and Claire returned fully to her daily life, attending events, supporting her husband, managing responsibilities with quiet focus. Yet something inside her felt lighter because she no longer carried confusion, only acceptance, and she found herself making small choices that mattered, speaking more openly, setting gentle boundaries, allowing herself moments of reflection without guilt, while Ethan focused on his work with renewed clarity, channeling his energy into growth rather than restraint. And when an unexpected opportunity arose, a position in Toronto offering responsibility and a fresh start, he considered it carefully, understanding that some chapters are meant to end not because they are painful but because they have taught what they needed to teach, and after long thought he accepted the offer, giving proper notice and maintaining professionalism, and when Claire heard the news she felt a quiet mix of relief and sadness, knowing distance would make the right choice easier. And on Ethan's final day the office gathered to wish him well, exchanging polite words and warm smiles, and when the crowd thinned Claire approached his desk calmly, leaving behind a small handwritten note that simply thanked him for listening and for reminding her of herself, and Ethan read it later in the quiet of his empty workspace, feeling both grateful and reflective, understanding that their connection had never needed more than acknowledgement. And as he moved to Toronto, he built a new routine, a new apartment, new streets, and new goals. Yet sometimes on quiet evenings he found himself remembering the moment by the window, the look on Claire's face, the understanding they shared without crossing lines. And he realized that not all meaningful relationships are meant to be lived fully, some exist to guide and then let go. While back in Boston, Claire stood by her own window months later, watching the city change seasons again, feeling stronger and more present in her life, carrying no regret, only gratitude for a moment that reminded her to stay honest with herself. And though they never spoke again, the brief chapter they shared remained with them both, not as a secret or a loss, but as proof that maturity sometimes means choosing integrity over impulse, and that some stories end quietly yet leave the deepest mark, because they teach the heart how to choose what truly matters.